Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Take Your Shot podcast. On today's show, we continue our discussion of the in-season tournament, plus react to the new NBA All-Star format. That's all coming up and more on today's episode of the Take Your Shot podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. Of course, as always, I am your wonderful host, Josh Gitman, and I hope everyone has had a great week. It's been an amazing, thrilling week of NBA basketball, especially the in-season tournament, which we will get into in a couple of seconds. But there has also been a lot of tension going around in the league for a specific basketball team, the Philadelphia 76ers, that we will talk about also on the show. We've got a lot to cover, and we will start, as I mentioned, with the in-season tournament right here, right now on the Take Your Shot podcast. And we will recap all the games that happened last Tuesday and Friday. And we will start with East Group A as the New York Knicks, in what was a scary game. They were up big against the Brooklyn Nets. And when I mean big, I mean 25 points big. And Brooklyn came back, was up 2 points, and Jalen Brunson hit a game-winning shot to give the New York Knicks the in-season tournament win and improve them to 2-0 in East Group A. It was a little bit of a scary game for the New York Knicks. Obviously, they are still trying to figure things out themselves, even though they are on a decent winning streak. I think they're up to 9-6 now, if I'm not mistaken, after they beat the Phoenix Suns on Wednesday night. And the Knicks right now have control of their own destiny in East Group A. They host the Orlando Magic, who are also 2-0. And if they win that, the New York Knicks, they will most likely be the winners of East Group A. And speaking of the Orlando Magic, they beat the Philadelphia 76ers at home 98-86 as Franz Wagner had 31 points, and they go to 2-0. So as I said, the Knicks will host the Magic. Last game for both of them in the in-season tournament. It will most likely determine who wins East Group A. Also, the Nets still in contention here. They're still not out of it, even though they did lose to the New York Knicks. They beat the Charlotte Hornets by 1 point as Cameron Johnson scored 34. If the Brooklyn Nets can pull off an upset here against Orlando, beat the 76ers, and maybe the Knicks slip up somewhere, you never know. The Nets could still be in contention for a wild card spot, and the Hornets now 0-2. They are most likely eliminated from East Group A. Moving on to East Group B, the Detroit Pistons go to 2-0 as they defeat the Toronto Raptors, and the Pistons get the Milwaukee Bucks, who are the only other undefeated team in the in-season tournament for East Group B, at home. The Pistons are controlling their own destiny right now. It's not been that bad of a season for the Pistons. They are 7-9, remember. They did get that win against Miami. Of course, the whole Eric Spoelstra timeout situation. Now they go on the road to Toronto, probably the worst team in this group, getting much-needed win. They, obviously, as I mentioned, they host the Bucks, and they have to go at Indiana. So if Detroit can get both of those games and go 4-0, they will win this group. It will be difficult because those two teams are probably the two most talented teams in East Group B. But Detroit does control their own fate, even though they are 7-9. What also happened in East Group B, there was an upset. The Indiana Pacers, the defending runner-ups of the Emirates NBA Cup, lost to the Miami Heat in blowout fashion, 124-111, as Bam Adebayo scored 30 points. It was an elimination game for the Heat after, as I mentioned, their disastrous loss against the Detroit Pistons on the road. And Miami goes to 1-1, and they play the Milwaukee Bucks next, not until next week. And if Miami can upset the Bucks here and the Pistons can lose somewhere else, Miami will be in contention to win this group. So the Heat are not out of it yet. They got the Bucks at home and they got the Raptors at home. They already played their 2 road games. So Miami had to have it against the Pacers and did. And now there is a legitimate chance for them to be in the wild card conversations and potentially, with a Detroit loss, to get back in this group. So East Group B right now, Detroit sitting at 2-0, Milwaukee at 1-0. They don't face off quite yet, but that will be an interesting matchup. Miami still hanging around there. Indiana going to have to win or else they're going to be out. And, of course, the Toronto Raptors 0-2, most likely eliminated now from the contention. Let's move on to East Group C as the Atlanta Hawks after coming off their upset of the Boston Celtics, defeat the Washington Wizards 129 to 117. The Atlanta Hawks surprisingly doing decent in this in-season tournament. They're currently sitting at 7-8. And now they defeat the Wizards, as I mentioned. They are 2-0. They still have to play the Cavs, and they still have to play the Chicago Bulls on the road. And I think they get the Cavs at home, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, and then Chicago on the road. So if Atlanta wins both of those, they win the group at 4-0. But if they lose to the Cavs, now it becomes this three-way tie conversation here with Boston, Cleveland, and Atlanta. So the point differential, them beating the Washington Wizards by 12 will matter, and that group, assuming the favorites win the rest of the way, will most likely come down to a three-way tiebreaker between the Hawks, Cavs, and Wizards. And speaking of those Cleveland Cavaliers, they start 1-0 as they defeat the Chicago Bulls by 18 points. It was a lot closer than it actually looked. And then at the end, Cleveland really ramped it up. And again, that matters, especially for a tiebreaker situation. Point differential matters. And right now, Cleveland has the highest point differential in East Group C. But after they beat the Chicago Bulls, sitting at 15-0, what did I say on this podcast? They were probably going to beat the Bulls. They were probably going to beat the Hornets. I think that was pretty much a given. Go into Boston and go beat the defending champion Celtics. They did not do that. Yes, it was close. The Cavs made it very competitive, but they did not win the game. So they are currently 16-1 after they beat the dismantled New Orleans Pelicans the other night. So the Cavaliers are 1-1 in East Group C, excuse me. They get Atlanta on the road, and they get to host the Washington Wizards. So if Cleveland can win those two games, they will probably be in a good spot to at least get a wild card, if not win East Group C, due to the point differential and due to, even though they lost against the Celtics, they kept it close while their one win against the Bulls was a blowout. So right now, Cleveland has the edge in point differential. We will see if the Hawks can go at home and upset the Cavaliers, but that group still has a lot of chaos to be unfolded. Let's move on to the Western Conference. As West Group A, the Rockets open up group play with a win, 125-104, blowing out James Harden and the Los Angeles Clippers. Obviously, the Clippers, without Kawhi Leonard, not really in a good spot. They haven't been playing good as of late, and they're in a little bit of a rough spill right now, losing, I think, a couple of their games. Prior to that, now they're on a 3-game winning streak after being 6-7 and losing to the Rockets. Now they're 9-7, but they did lose a couple of games. Now they're back on track. But the Clippers right now 0-1, not in a good spot. The Rockets, who we'll talk about in a little bit, have been impressing very early on this season with their core, and they are in a decent position, especially with the upset of Portland beating Minnesota to potentially win West Group A. Then, speaking of those Minnesota Timberwolves, they defeat the Sacramento Kings in overtime to stay alive in the in-season tournament. If you go 0-2 in the in-season tournament, you are probably not going to win the group unless every single team goes 2-2, which the probability of that, obviously, not likely. So Minnesota gets a much-needed win in overtime against the Kings on the road. The Kings now start 0-1, so they are going to have to win the rest of the way out if they want a chance in the in-season tournament, West Group A. But Minnesota still in contention to win that group now. You have Houston at 1-0. You have the Timberwolves at 1-1, and you have Portland at 1-0. And we will get to them as we preview the in-season tournament at the end of the episode. But though Portland, Houston, and Minnesota are the teams right now to look out for in West Group A. West Group B, the Los Angeles Lakers beat the San Antonio Spurs and beat the Utah Jazz to start off 2-0 in group play. The Lakers are the defending NBA Emirates Cup champions, and they are looking to repeat the in-season tournament, and they are on pace to do that. The Lakers have never lost an in-season tournament game yet in the 2 years that this tournament has been created, and they are in a decent position here to win this group. They have a big one at Phoenix. But again, that's without Kevin Durant, and they get to host the Oklahoma City Thunder. Assuming they win those with decent point differentials, they will win the group. If they split one, the one they win is going to have to be by decent point differential, because the Lakers did not beat the Spurs by that much, and they didn't really beat the Jazz by that much either, which is a little bit disappointing if you're a Lakers fan. So you really want to Try to win both of these games, and if you can, you're going to win the group. If not, the one game you're going to win, it's going to have to be by a lot. But the Lakers do start off 2-0, which you can't really complain when you have not lost yet in the in-season tournament. The Spurs bounced back, though, after losing to the Lakers, upsetting the Oklahoma City Thunder 110-104 without Victor Wembanyama. And now that group goes into a little bit of chaos here as the Suns are 1-1 as they lost to the Thunder. Then the Thunder lost to the Spurs, and the Spurs lost to the Lakers. So all three of those teams are currently sitting at 1-1 with sad little Utah at 0-2. But those three teams, interesting dynamic there. They played each other at least once, and there's going to be an elimination game there. One of those teams is going to get out by the next time. There's really this jumbo here at 1-1, and the Spurs already played the Lakers, so it's going to be tough for them to make a comeback here. So really, the Thunder and the Suns have the best chance to come back and steal West Group B from the Lakers, but the Lakers right now clearly have the edge in this group. West Group C, we had a lot of matchups. The Pelicans, the injury-riddled Pelicans, they upset the Denver Nuggets at home, and this is actually a big deal. This is a much bigger deal than you can perceive it, because now the Golden State Warriors, who are 2-0 after defeating the Memphis Grizzlies 123-118 at home, really have the upper edge in West Group C. Denver, of course, they bounced back, beating the Grizzlies, which essentially eliminates Memphis as they are 0-2, are now at 1-1. The Warriors, if I'm not mistaken, I think they do get to host the Denver Nuggets. And if the Warriors beat the Nuggets at home, this group will most likely go to the Golden State Warriors. Of course, the Dallas Mavericks still alive as they beat the Pelicans, and the Pelicans are 1-1. But assuming the Warriors beat the Pelicans in New Orleans, which they probably should, considering now even Brandon Ingram's out, of course, Murray, CJ McCollum, Zion out for a while, Jose Alvarado, Herbert Jones, the list goes on and on and on. The Pelicans signed Elfrid Payton, and then 24 hours later started him against the Cleveland Cavaliers before they lost by a lot of points in that contest. But Pelicans are injury-riddled, and the Warriors really have an upper hand in this group. Denver is going to need to win out in order to win this group, which is obviously possible, and it will most likely be that showdown at Golden State that will determine West Group C. But right now, Golden State has the upper hand. And that is the recap for Week 2 of the in-season tournament. And we are going to discuss some other things that are happening in the NBA before we preview Week 3 of the in-season tournament. And let's start with the Philadelphia 76ers because, man, 2-12. I mean, you had a lot of cards on the table for what this season could have held for the 76ers. You could have said, oh, the 76ers are going to be a first-round exit. This is going to blow up in their face. Okay, Philly's going to make the second round, not even make the conference finals. Okay, Joel Embiid, with this team, the best team that he has, is going to make the conference finals for the first time. You didn't have on your cards for the possibility of this team this year to start off 2-12 and have the worst record in the NBA. I will say it again. The Philadelphia 76ers, yes, that team with Joel Embiid, Paul George, Tyrese Maxey, currently has the worst record in the NBA. And it was so bad that the 76ers, after blowing a 19-point lead to the Miami Heat on Monday night, decided to have a team meeting. It was actually Kyle Lowry, the veteran point guard, who was a former Miami Heat player, who called this team meeting. And there was a lot of discussion going on behind the scenes in this team meeting. And I don't know how this meeting got leaked to the public. Obviously, someone on the inside must have said something to someone because there are a lot of details from this meeting. If you're a 76ers fan, you might be concerned about it, or it could be a good thing, this meeting. It's not really something that we can really evaluate yet because Philadelphia, even after the meeting, they lost to the Memphis Grizzlies, and it was a disastrous game for them. And Paul George also got hurt in that game against the Memphis Grizzlies. So Philly is really, really having major setbacks this season, and it doesn't help that Paul George, the one who's actually been somewhat decently healthy after missing the first 5 games, is now out once again, as Tyrese Maxey just came back. And now Embiid, obviously, he is banged up, and he's going to be obviously limited in what he does. But this team meeting, the 76ers decided to call a team meeting, something that obviously definitely I'm not surprised because 2-11 at the point where they called the meeting, it's not really what you expected from this 76ers team. And a lot of frustration boiled over, as I mentioned. The coaches were complaining about the players' effort on the court. Players were complaining about Nick Nurse and his coaching staff. It was a lot of back and forth arguing. But that's what team meetings are. Team meetings are to really just put everything to the fore. Say everything you got to say, because there's a problem and the problem needs to be fixed. And if you're holding everything on the inside right here, the problem's not going to get fixed. So this meeting might have not been a bad thing, but everything really came out. And then it happened. The biggest thing at the meeting happened. And this is something you don't really expect, especially from the person who said it, which was Tyrese Maxey, a 24-year-old, calling out Joel Embiid, an 11-year NBA veteran, for his habits, his routine, his lack of effort. Tyrese Maxey, a fourth-year, fifth-year guy in this league, calling out a former MVP about his effort, as the 76ers currently sit 9 games over 500 at the time of this meeting. That was beyond courageous. That was beyond noble. That was beyond being a leader by Tyrese Maxey, because that was absolutely necessary to say. What Tyrese Maxey said to Joel Embiid: you lack effort. You're not really 100% locked in. It was necessary to say, because let's be honest, people, Joel Embiid has not been locked in since Jimmy Butler left the 76ers. And I've heard rumors, I've heard reports that said Joel Embiid hasn't been happy since Jimmy Butler's left. And it really looks like that's the case, because Joel Embiid getting injured time to time, doesn't really look like he's trying out there. He's walking up to practices. He's not even showing up to shoot-arounds before the games. It doesn't look like Joel Embiid is locked in. And we know every single year, whatever team Philadelphia has formed, on paper, it looks like a team that can compete for a championship, a team that can reach the conference finals. Yet, they've had disappointing second-round exits, disappointing first-round exits. It's on and on, same story, same situation. Joel Embiid doesn't get it done once again for the 5th straight season. So something's up. Because if you're trying everything, you're trying Jimmy Butler, then you're trying the Ben Simmons, Tobias Harris experiment, and you're letting loose Jimmy Butler. Then you try James Harden. Then you try James Harden and Tyrese Maxey. And then now you have this version of this team with Paul George, Tyrese Maxey. When are you going to get it done if you're Joel Embiid? That is a question trying to be asked, because Tyrese Maxey really had to carry that Philadelphia 76ers team without you, Joel Embiid, without him for a majority of last season, just to get in the play-in tournament, just to be a 7th seed in the play-in tournament. Philly was very behind in the standings, and Tyrese Maxey really settled them in. They didn't lose as much as they were supposed to. They had some upsets here or there, and it really kept them in that 7-8 seed conversation. And they ultimately, when Joel Embiid actually got healthy, somewhat, had a home game against the Heat, which they won. Of course, Butler got injured and the circumstances could have been different, but they won, and Tyrese Maxey kept them afloat for most of the season that Embiid was hurt. Now you go into this season. Maxey's healthy. Joel Embiid played Team USA, coming back from a gold medal. He's all good. He's ready to go. Paul George just signed with the 76ers. Okay, this team is a legit contender and a threat to the defending NBA champions in the Boston Celtics. And then injury for Joel Embiid. Injury for Paul George. Tyrese Maxey gets injured. He doesn't really get injured a lot, so can I really blame him? And Joel Embiid is just not healthy. I don't know what it is. He is not healthy, or he's not trying. You've got to give me something. We don't know, legitimately. As NBA media, NBA fans, nobody knows whether Joel Embiid is just not healthy. He's not trying. Is it a little bit of both? We don't know what's going on with Joel Embiid, and neither do the Philadelphia 76ers players, which is why Tyrese Maxey called him out in the meeting, straight up to his face in front of the entire team. And Joel Embiid has to figure this out. I don't know if that's taking off some more games, making sure you're 100% healthy and ready to go, because Joel Embiid, not 100% healthy against Miami, looked like a liability on the court. 11 points, awful shooting, did not get to the free throw line once. Joel Embiid was not the player that we've seen before. He was not the MVP that we know he is capable of being. He is not the top 5 player in the league that we know Joel Embiid can be at times when needed. I don't know what he has to do. Whether that's work harder, maybe sit out a couple of games to get a little bit more healthier, something has to change for the 76ers, because it's not like they have any flexibility. They can't trade everyone. They just signed everyone from free agency. There was a reason they had the most cap room, because they had to reload a roster that didn't have a lot of players under contract. So you can't trade anyone other than maybe your rookies. And obviously the one bright spot of the team is Jared McCann, who is looking to be the favorite for Rookie of the Year right now. He's absolutely balling out, a sharpshooter. Very impressive from what I'm seeing from him. But other than that, it's been an absolute disaster for the 76ers this season. You're 10 games under, and the Eastern Conference isn't good. So there is definitely time, especially if they get on a hot streak for 2 weeks or multiple hot streaks over the span of a month. There is definitely time for the 76ers to recover. But it's a big hole. It's a very big hole. 10 games under 500 is a very big hole to come after. Even the Chicago Bulls and the Atlanta Hawks last year, who were the 9 and 10 seed of the East, weren't 10 games under 500. Do I expect the 76ers to recover from this? Probably, but maybe they should look in a different direction. Could you explore the possibility of trading Joel Embiid, starting over and building around Tyrese Maxey and lottery picks? Remember, the Philadelphia 76ers do not own their first-round pick this year. It is top 6 protected. They do have some leeway, but it is owned by, of course, the Oklahoma City Thunder. So Philadelphia doesn't have a lot of wiggle room. You either got to suck or you got to figure this you-know-what out right now, because time is running out. You lose 5 more games out of the next 7. Look at where you are now. You're 5 more games under the 500. Now you're 4 and 17. Now you're 13 games, under the 500. There is not a lot of room for the 76ers to mess up anymore this season, because they are digging themselves a deep hole that is very hard to come out of. There has only been 5 teams in the history of the NBA that have started 2-11 or worse that have made the postseason. And those teams that actually did make the postseason were first-round exits. There is a problem in Philadelphia, and I think it all goes, and it's all centered around the superstar. I don't think Nick Nurse is the problem. He's a great coach. Maybe they could be executing some things better, but Nick Nurse is a champion. He won an NBA championship with the Toronto Raptors, with a roster that's, you could make the case, is just as good as Nick Nurse's 2019 Toronto Raptors. It's not the coach's fault. It's not Tyrese Maxey's fault. It's not even Paul George's fault. It's the superstar. Joel Embiid has to figure his things out, because there's no more room to falter. Figure it out. And that's all I got to say on the Philadelphia 76ers. But let me move on to the new NBA All-Star format, as the NBA All-Star game is changing. And it's changing for the good, as we are going to have a similar format for the NBA All-Star game, as Shams Charania reports, as the Rising Star game. 4 teams, a tournament-style All-Star game where we have 32 players, NBA All-Stars, about 8 players per team, and 1 team from the Rising Stars contest. And what exactly do I mean? So let me break it down for you. We are going to have 3 NBA All-Star teams. I don't know how it's going to get picked. We don't know that yet, but 3 teams of 8 players each, which is about 24 players. Not 32. I don't know how to do math. 24 players each, 12 from probably each conference, picked to these teams. I don't know how it's going to get picked exactly, once again. Then the 4th team, what is that? It is the winning team of the Rising Stars contest. So the Rising Stars contest that happens on Friday night, the winner of that will be able to go against the NBA All-Stars. Now, how awesome is that? The winner of the Rising Stars team, I will say it again to not cause confusion, will be the fourth team that will play in the All-Star game, the team of 8 players. And that will create the 4 teams that will play in the All-Star game tournament-style bracket. So there will be 3 All-Star teams, and the final team will be the winner of the Rising Stars tournament, which also consists of 4 teams, 3 teams of rookies and second-year players, and 1 G League team. Could you imagine the G League team of the Rising Stars actually winning and ending up playing against the All-Stars? You know how incredible that would be? That would be awesome, but obviously that's probably not going to happen. But the point is, we have a new All-Star format, and it's much better because we've seen the All-Star game in the past. Let's be honest, people. It's awful. It's awful. These NBA players do not try in the All-Star game. It's just a break. They just get a free vacation, just get some photo ops, don't really play defense, just jack up a bunch of shots, go on their way, and start the second half of the NBA season. Something had to be done to this NBA All-Star game, period, flat out, nothing else to say. And something did happen. And this is a format that we've seen in the Rising Stars for the past 2 years, and it's been pretty competitive. It's more nerve-wracking because the first round, the semifinals, is first to 40 and the championship is first to 25. It's competitive. Like, okay, it's not a target score just in the fourth quarter, which they actually eliminated. I think they got rid of the target score last year, which made it a lot worse. But there is a target score you have to get. You have to get to 40 points. And it's not like it's going to be a blowout after around 40 points. Like, when NBA teams normally score 40 in a game, it's not a blowout. At worst, it's probably a 10-point game. Very rarely do you see scores in the NBA be 40-20. You could see it maybe being 40-30, but more like 40-35, 40-37. Like, these games are going to be more competitive. They're going to be closer, and especially the championship as well, because it's only to 25. How many times do we see a score of 25-10, 25-15? It's going to be more like 25-22, 25-19. It's going to be more competitive, very tight games, actual defense, less players, so more playing time for the 8 guys who are on the court. Of course, it's going to be less time overall. These games that are going to take, it's going to be shorter than actual regular basketball games, but it's less players on a roster. More people get to play. Maybe there's 3 captains that get to draft, maybe the top voter of each conference, and then go from the second highest voter there, whether that's from the West or the East. I don't know exactly how they are going to pick these teams, but maybe that's an idea that they do. I don't know. But it's going to be way better because I've seen it in the Rising Stars. It's awesome. I had more fun last year watching the Rising Stars game than the actual NBA All-Star game. And the fact that they are finally deciding to really change this format, something that has been switched around a lot. They've tried the captains thing, then they got rid of it last year. And it's just been the same boring All-Star game where it's just back and forth. They're jacking up shots. It's a blowout a majority of the time. We want this to be fun. I'm not saying they need to go all out and compete like a regular season game, but we need this to be somewhat of a competitive, somewhat of a more than just jacking up shots, not trying on defense kind of a game, if you guys know what I'm saying. And I think this provides that. And Adam Silver has done an incredible job trying to figure out exactly what the perfect scenario for the All-Star game would be. And I think this is definitely a change that could work. Of course, we're going to try it out this year, see how it goes in San Francisco, which is where the All-Star game is going to be held in 2025. Of course, the NBA is trying to expand some more of their ideas, like the NBA versus WNBA three-point contest. We saw Steph Curry versus Sabrina Ionescu last year. Maybe we can see a 2-on-2. Steph Curry, Klay Thompson versus Sabrina and Caitlin Clark. I'm just throwing something out there. But that was fun. The NBA versus WNBA three-point contest. I mean, some of these events are actual jokes. Well, other ones like the three-point contests and the Rising Stars are actually fun to watch. Like, if they can fix the skills contest, if they can make the dunk contest a little bit better and get some all-stars out there, the All-Star weekend can be amazing. What happened to the All-Star weekends in the early 2000s where we actually had competitive events? We had great historic dunk contests. We had memorable All-Star games. What happened to that? Because in 2024, it was a disaster. And hopefully this new rule And this new All-Star game format is just the start to something better for the NBA and All-Star weekend. But we have other things to talk about, including the Houston Rockets, who have impressed very early at the start of the season. They have been one of the surprises of the NBA this season. They are currently sitting at 11-5. Of course, Houston last year did end up getting the 11th seed as they were down by like 10 games behind to the Golden State Warriors last year. And they made a push. They made a comeback late in the season. They had some major winning streaks, a major winning streak to the point where they set up a contest against the Warriors, which could have determined who would have gotten the 10 seed. And the Rockets are a young and rising team. They've got, of course, Ime Udoka, which he is coming in as a second-year head coach with the Rockets. Of course, he was the former head coach of the Boston Celtics when they made the NBA championship in 2022. Obviously, he had the misconduct issues in Boston, which got him dismissed and gets this opportunity in Houston. But the thing about the Rockets that I really like this year is the camaraderie, the balance, the collectiveness of their team. It's not one person dominating. It's not just Jalen Green getting 30 points per game. It's not Alfred Sengun getting 25 and 10. It is everybody contributing to Houston. And that's what I thought was the strength of their team, their depth. They have a lot of young, strong guys who provide a lot of energy on the court. And that is something that not a lot of NBA teams have. And Houston has really turned around this year. They had a disappointing opening loss to the Hornets. They had a bad loss to the Spurs there. They were sitting at 1-2. And now they have won 10 out of their last 13 games, sitting at obviously, as I mentioned, 11-5, third in the Western Conference. Actually, I think now fourth because the Lakers just passed them last night. But the Rockets are doing some impressive things. And this young team is very impressive. Jalen Green, Alfred Sengun, Fred VanVleet, all averaging more than 15 points per game. Jabari Smith Jr., Tari Eason, Dylan Brooks, Amin Thompson averaging more than 10 points per game. It's everybody contributing scoring-wise. It's not just one person, as I mentioned. Sengun's doing great on the glass, 11 rebounds per game. I mean, there is just a lot that you can say that's been going well for Houston. Fred VanVleet passing the ball well at 6 assists per game. This team has a lot of depth, has a lot of energy, and the question that Houston has to answer at the trade deadline, because we know that they have been gathering assets. They have the Phoenix Suns first-round picks because of the trade they made with the Brooklyn Nets this offseason, where they gave Brooklyn their picks back from the James Harden trade, and they got the Phoenix Suns picks from the Kevin Durant trade. So now Houston has two very valuable first-round picks, including their own, that they can go and trade to a team to maybe get someone to add to their team. I don't know. Jimmy Butler's on the market. You could maybe look at some other stars as well. I'm just throwing out a name there on Jimmy Butler because, of course, the Heat have been having contract extension issues with him, and maybe he could be on the market. I think he would be a good fit in Houston. But the question is for the Rockets, are you willing to break up your core in order to get a star to really help this team contend? And if you look at the state of the West, and you look at the trajectory of your team, which is young, rising, balanced, tough, gritty, do you really want to mess that up to get a little bit better to potentially contend? That is the question the Rockets have to answer. And obviously, they could pull off this big move this trade deadline. They can pull it off in the offseason. They can pull it off next trade deadline. They have time because they are young. That is the beauty of this Rockets team. So maybe they're going to see how it works for a second year, and if it doesn't work out, maybe then they decide to do the move. But if they really want to go for it this year, they could do it. And I think the way that this team has looked, I don't think they should do anything quite yet, because sitting at 11-5 in the Western Conference for how competitive that conference is very impressive. They just had a very nice win against the Indiana Pacers the other day, 130-113. And they've not just beaten teams, they've blown out teams. I mean, they beat the Clippers by 21. They beat the Bulls by 36. They beat the Wizards by 15. They beat the Spurs by 27. They beat the Knicks by 12. The Rockets aren't just winning close games. They are winning these games with ease. They are winning with a decent margin. Like the Rockets, when they win, they don't get in close games. Like they're blowing these teams out. And it is very impressive to see this young, this rising Houston Rockets team. The question is, can they stay healthy for most of the year? The one disappointment I would say is Reed Shepherd, who's averaging 4 points per game off the bench. But of course, he is a rookie. He is the third pick, so there are some expectations. But other than that, it's been very good, very collective. And it felt like the Rockets didn't even have a bad season last year because most of the games they lost were close games, and now they are winning those games in convincing fashion. So we will see how the young rising Rockets continue to improve. But this is a very, very good start for a team that has a lot of potential and can make a lot of noise in the Western Conference. But let's talk about a team that they've made a trade with before in the Brooklyn Nets. And the Nets are going in the opposite direction of the Houston Rockets. They are selling, unlike the Rockets who are buying. And the Brooklyn Nets actually haven't even had that awful of a start to the regular season, sitting at 6-9. They beat the Charlotte Hornets the other night by 1 point, as I mentioned, in the in-season tournament. And the East is just a disaster. And sitting at 6-9, the Brooklyn Nets are currently in 8th place in the Eastern Conference. Obviously, that's not where they want to be. The Brooklyn Nets are clearly in a rebuilding state. As I mentioned, they got their picks back from the Houston Rockets. So they are looking to trade. And it has been reported openly. I have heard this from multiple influential people in the NBA, that the Brooklyn Nets are looking to trade anyone on the roster. And when I mean anyone, I mean Cam Thomas is on the board. Cameron Johnson is on the board. Dorian Finney-Smith is on the board. Dennis Schroeder is on the board. The Brooklyn Nets have a lot of assets that they could potentially trade. And this could be the team that gives contending teams the extra boost. Like, remember, Cameron Johnson was a huge part in the Phoenix Suns finals run. He ended up playing a huge role for the Suns. Remember, Dorian Finney-Smith, a great defender and helped the Mavericks on their runs in the past. Dennis Schroeder, he's having an incredible season, and he has been known to be a reliable point guard. And then Cam Thomas is a scoring machine. Yes, he's not that great on defense, but Cam Thomas just knows how to put the ball in the basket, people. So these guys for the Brooklyn Nets, they are game changers for contending teams. Like the Hornets were the team last year. They traded P.J. Washington. They traded Gordon Hayward. The Magic have been that team before where they traded Vucevic, Aaron Gordon, Evan Fournier. There's one team like this every year where they just decide to sell a bunch of their players. And this year, obviously Chicago is in that conversation, but the team that you got to really look out for is the Brooklyn Nets, because you don't want to win games if you're the Nets. You have your own pick, and this year is all about capturing the flag, Cooper Flagg, a credible freshman out of Duke who is one of the most hyped up first overall picks in a very long time, other than the exception of Victor Wembanyama. Cooper Flagg is the legit deal. This is a very deep, heavy draft class. Even if you don't get the number one pick, you still need to get a top pick to get one of these players because these guys are very good. This draft class is elite. I've been watching. This is going to be a strong year for the NBA draft. So the Brooklyn Nets, they don't want to win basketball games. They are going to try to get everything you can. And sometimes they may even underpay. They may even try to get something for Cameron Johnson, something for Dorian Finney-Smith, if you know what I mean. Like the Nets just want to get rid of these players. So contending teams, what team is going to come up on the market that's going to want one of these players? Because trust me, Cameron Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, valuable assets on a championship contender. And there's some other guys that I didn't even mention yet. Like, what about Bojan Bogdanovic? He hasn't played this year for the Nets. He was part of the Mikal Bridges trade. He is a valuable asset for a contending team. He knows how to put the ball in the basket and play some 3-and-D. The Nets have a lot of players that they can trade here, and this is probably the team that you are going to have to look out for at the trade deadline as the team that is going to be selling. And we have got to that point at the end of the episode now where we are going to preview the final games of the in-season tournament, which is going to be this week on Friday and on Tuesday. Of course, we will do that once again. And the in-season tournament has been going great so far. The competition has been elite as always. It's been really exciting to watch. The courts are a little bit better this year. And now we get to the point where we have a lot more elimination games, a lot more meaningful games heading into week 3 of the in-season tournament. And we've got, I think, 6, 9, 11. We've got 13 games that are happening in the next 2 in-season tournament days, and we are going to preview them all for you. And starting, of course, with East Group A, working our way all the way down to West Group C before we finish it off for the day. Starting with East Group A, we only have one game going on in this week, which is the Brooklyn Nets at the Philadelphia 76ers. The 76ers are 0-2 in the in-season tournament, losing to the Magic and the Knicks. They are pretty much eliminated. But again, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. If the Nets beat the 76ers, they could be in contention for a wild card. Remember, as we mentioned, the 76ers are 2-12. They're not doing so good. So the Nets are definitely going to have a shot in Philadelphia to beat the 76ers. And if they do, sitting at 2-1, if they could potentially beat the Magic, they could be in a position to get the wild card spot. So the Nets definitely still alive here in the in-season tournament. And if I had to pick, I would say the Philadelphia 76ers win this game, but God knows what the way their record is. East Group B, we have 2 contests for you. The Milwaukee Bucks featured in both of those contests. The Indiana Pacers on Friday night tonight are going up against the Milwaukee Bucks in Milwaukee. It is a huge game for both teams. Indiana trying to face off elimination as they already are 0-1 after losing to the Miami Heat. The Milwaukee Bucks trying to improve to 2-0 and not go to 1-1. If the Milwaukee Bucks win this, they will set themselves up with an important clash against the Detroit Pistons at 2-0 apiece. And if the Indiana Pacers win this, well, Detroit's got the key to victory. With one more win, it would look like the Detroit Pistons are going to win this group. So Detroit wants Indiana to win this. If you're a team like Miami who's sitting at 1-1, or if you want Milwaukee to win this. So we will see who wins that. If I had to pick, I'm going to pick the Bucks because they have played better as of recently. Indiana just not looking real good. Had a bad loss to the Houston Rockets the other night. And of course, when you make the conference finals, more teams are going to pay attention to you, and it's going to be much harder to win basketball games. And sometimes that happens with teams where they make the conference finals unexpectedly. The next year they have a really disastrous season, and that could be what's going on with the Indiana Pacers. Then on Tuesday, the Milwaukee Bucks have a huge one again at Miami, who are sitting at 1-1. And if Milwaukee beats the Indiana Pacers, right, this could be the game that determines who wins the group. And that may sound crazy, but Detroit, I don't think they're going to beat both Milwaukee and Indiana. So if the Bucks and the Heat play here, and the Bucks are sitting at 2-0, the Heat at 1-1, if Miami gets this win, gets the tiebreaker over the Bucks, they could be sitting in a decent position to compete for a wild card because they did have a 13-point win against Indiana, a decently high point differential. And remember, their point differential for the loss at Detroit was 0 because the game went to overtime. So Miami is sitting at a excuse me. Miami is sitting at a plus point differential right now, so they are in a very good position. And if the Bucks lose the game, then it would be an elimination game for both teams. Of course, it's an elimination game for the Miami Heat already, but if the Bucks lose, this would be an elimination game. East Group C, the Celtics go at Washington. Oh, I forgot to give you my pick for the Bucks at the Heat. I would probably pick the Miami Heat to upset the Milwaukee Bucks in that game. Now to East Group C we go. The Boston Celtics playing at the Washington Wizards. Celtics 1-1, Wizards 0-1. It's an elimination game for both teams, but obviously we know who's going to win that. The Boston Celtics, easy and done. Next on Friday, that's also happening, the 2-0 Atlanta Hawks are traveling to Chicago. Now, Chicago, again, facing elimination, but if Atlanta gets this, they will be 3-0 in the group before hosting the Cavaliers to win the group, which could be a shocker in East Group C because we all thought it was either going to be Cleveland or Boston. But if Atlanta goes 4-0, they win this group. They control their own destiny right now to make the knockout rounds. And it's going to be a tough one at Chicago because Chicago hasn't been that bad this year. They've been competitive in the games that they've lost. They've had some decent wins this year as well. And if I had to pick, I'm going to say the Atlanta Hawks go down to 2-1 as the Bulls upset them and go 1-1. And if that were to happen, Then on Tuesday, a 1-1 Bulls team would play a Washington Wizards team, and I would pick the Bulls in that game, and the Bulls could go 2-1. And just like that, you have the Chicago Bulls now in contention with the Cavs and the Celtics to win this group, because the Bulls do have to go at Boston to play the Celtics, but if they were to upset the Celtics, they would be in contention to win this group. So there's still a lot of things to answer about East Group C because of this Atlanta upset over the Boston Celtics. So we've got a lot to digest here. I think Chicago, what they do in the next two games will tell us a lot about where the direction of the group is going. And obviously Boston, if they beat Washington, they will most likely still be in contention for a wild card. Now let's move on to the Western Conference. West Group A, we have three matchups, two happening Friday and one happening Tuesday. The 1-0 Blazers on Friday night going to the Houston Rockets at 1-0 as well, and this is a huge game for the group. Winner 2-0, already halfway to winning the group. And the Blazers coming off a great upset against Minnesota, as I mentioned. Houston beating the Los Angeles Clippers, as we said earlier. It's a big game, but as I said, Houston's been playing well. Portland, obviously, in a much different situation, rebuilding situation. It was a nice upset against the Timberwolves, but I think it stops here at Houston, and Houston goes to 2-0 in the in-season tournament. Then the second game Friday is an elimination game because the 0-1 Kings are going to Intuit Dome to play the 0-1 Los Angeles Clippers. If I had to pick, I'm going to say the Kings upset the Clippers in that one. But once again, it is an elimination game because if you already have two losses, you're not winning the group or you're not getting a wild card at 2-2. So this is a must-win for both of these teams after the Kings lose to the Timberwolves in overtime and the Clippers lose to the Rockets in blowout fashion. I'm going to pick the Kings in this one. But again, elimination game for both of those teams. Then on the 26th, the Tuesday, the Rockets, if they were to beat the Blazers, which obviously most of us think they will, they are going to be 2-0 going into Minnesota at 1-1. And obviously Minnesota got upset by Portland. But if Minnesota were to beat the Houston Rockets at home, the Timberwolves would have the tiebreaker over the Rockets, and they would most likely be favorites to win the group. So this game, Houston at Minnesota, assuming Houston gets their job done against Portland, could be the game that determines West Group A. And of course, both of them, no matter what, could probably be in contention to a wild card. But if Houston does beat Minnesota, they're out. If Minnesota does beat Houston, they're not necessarily out unless they lose to Portland. But it will most likely be Minnesota's group to lose from there. So this game, Houston at Minnesota, could determine the group. I do like Minnesota at home in that one to beat the Rockets to end up both of them ending up being 2-1. We could have an interesting finish to West Group A. But of course, Houston's been playing great as of lately. Minnesota hasn't been that great. They're still adjusting. Julius Randle still adjusting to the team. Did have a nice buzzer beater the other night. But of course, Minnesota is still having that adjustment period as Houston, as I said, continuing to rise up in the Western Conference. West Group B has two contests. The San Antonio Spurs on Tuesday play the Utah Jazz. That's an elimination game for the Spurs. The Jazz are already out of it. If I had to pick, I'm going to pick the Spurs to go 2-1 and make West Group B a little more interesting. And a big one also on Tuesday, the Lakers at the Suns without Kevin Durant. Remember, if the Lakers get this one, I mean, the Lakers are probably going to win the group, let's be honest. Of course, they would have a big matchup against the Thunder at home for the final game of the in-season tournament. But if the Lakers win this one, they will most likely win the group. If the Suns lose, they are out. If the Suns win, it will set up an interesting finish, a potential three-way tie that could be determined by point differential to finish West Group B with the Lakers, Suns, and Oklahoma City Thunder after the Thunder got upset by the Spurs. And of course, the Spurs are not out of this because they did beat the Thunder. So if they were to beat the Jazz and then they beat the Suns, it could be very interesting in West Group B. But we're probably looking toward either the Lakers going 4-0 and winning or a three-way 3-1 tie. West Group C, we also have two contests. The Golden State Warriors at 2-0 going against the Pelicans at 1-1. The Pelicans ended up upsetting the Denver Nuggets at home before losing to the Dallas Mavericks on the road to go 0-1. Of course, Warriors beat the Dallas Mavericks at home, the inaugural game against Klay Thompson, his return to the Bay, and then they beat the Memphis Grizzlies at home. And the Warriors are going to win this one because the Pelicans are injury deprived. And if the Warriors win this game, they are going to most likely win this group because most of the teams in West Group C, other than the Grizzlies, are 1-1. So if you're sitting at 3-0, with the rest of the teams at 1-1 or 1-2, you're pretty much in a good position here if you're Golden State. Because even if Dallas wins, if Golden State wins and Dallas wins on Friday, Golden State is going to win the group. If the Warriors and the Nuggets win, as the Nuggets host the Dallas Mavericks, it could set up a very interesting clash at the Bay in San Francisco to determine who wins the group at 2-1 Denver, at 3-0 Golden State, there could be a tiebreaker situation there. But that could set up an interesting matchup, which I think that could potentially happen because I do think the Warriors are going to beat the Pelicans, and I do think the Nuggets in an elimination game will beat the Dallas Mavericks at home. And again, if that were the case, it would set up a game, Denver at Golden State, that could determine who wins West Group C. And that is it for the in-season tournament week 2 recap and week 3 preview. So that is what we have for the episode. Thank you so much for watching the Take Your Shot podcast. I really appreciate all the support, all the love, and I'm thankful on this week of Thanksgiving for all of you listening, all of you supporting, because it absolutely means the world to me as I am continuing to grow, continuing to try to expand my brand and make it in sports media. So I really appreciate all of you guys watching. Thank you so much. Have a blessed Thanksgiving and a blessed holiday, and we will see you next Friday as we continue recapping the in-season tournament and discuss more of what is happening in the NBA. Thank you, everybody. We will see you next time.